Many young people set out for college right after high school without a real game plan. It's just what you're supposed to do. Many quit, and that'll probably be it for them. It's 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Hell, most people that actually graduate college end up on that day shift and spend the rest of their lives paying off those student loans and eking out the basic blueprint of a normal life. Every once in a while, though, a person will go another route in finding out who they are. They'll pull a Hemingway or a Kerouac, maybe join the service, fight in a war that will leave indelible impressions upon them, eyes widening with the sense and scope of the world, and, if you're from the United States, a realization that maybe not everything your country does is necessarily in the world's best interest. They quit the military and go off on a new adventure as a solitary traveler, exploring foreign locales in ways that ordinary tourists never would, soaking up the various cultures and gaining a new perspective. Maybe they climb mountains, get their hearts broken a few times, and grow anxious about the plight of some of those countries that are ripped asunder in devastating turmoil. Maybe they do something about it and finally find exactly the purpose they were meant for. Today we have such a person, an ex-Air Force mechanic, a mountaineer, a world traveler, a humanitarian. Listen up, because you might just learn something. Today we have Eric Kramak, who is here to tell us his story on this episode of $5 Buzz.
Please step inside, lock the door behind you, make sure the towel's properly positioned, and as always, lock the door. You're sitting in again on another $5 Buzz. The crew is a little bit lighter today. Pete is out on assignment, but Roger Mayer, as always, in Los Angeles. How are you, Roger?
Doing fantastic today, sir. It's a nice Friday morning here in Los Angeles. Temperature, as David Lynch would say, 82 degrees. It's great.
Perfect day for filming, man. But I'm here, unseasonably beautiful day in Stamford, Connecticut. I'm at the Third Place Brewery enjoying a pumpkin spice beer right here while we do this show. It's going to be a really interesting show. I'm really excited about it. And Roger, real quickly, I just saw a show up at the Capitol Theater with one of your least favorite bands. One of the members of your least favorite bands, the Grateful Dead, Phil Lesh, played up there. But more importantly, in a couple of weeks, we got Gary Clark Jr. coming through.
Right.
And I'm going to go catch that show. I know you've done some work with him, so I'll be more excited to report back on that show.
Yeah, produced a music video for him for his song Pearl Cadillac.
Yeah, and hopefully if I get a chance to say hello to him, I'm going to pitch him. And we talked about maybe he may be polite enough to talk to us someday.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, so hopefully a little teaser. So today is historic on $5 Buzz because this is the first time we're doing a show with a guest who's located overseas. And our guest today is Eric Kramak. He sits currently in Amman, Jordan, on the other side of the world, and he's been gracious enough to take his time to talk to us. He's got a really interesting day job, and he's got a very interesting career in life. And we just want to share it with our audience. And funnily enough, Eric was one of the very first people I met in college, a small liberal arts school up in northern New York on the Canadian border, SUNY Potsdam. Roger, have you ever heard of it?
Might have heard of that. Have heard of it.
You've heard of it. And Eric, I remember, grew up in Mexico, not south of the border, Mexico, but Mexico, New York, which for those that don't have an atlas handy is situated up near Syracuse and Oswego, New York, another raging party town. So Eric, I always remember you would always say, I'm from Mexico. And just, Roger, it was like a Fletch movie, or you don't look Mexican. Eric, how many times have you heard that?
Once or twice, George. That's a pretty common trope in upstate New York. But a small town ribbing for sure.
Yeah, and I remember.
I was going to say that a lot of Mexicans do not, they do look like you. You could pass. You'd be surprised in southern Mexico. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was. You always handled it very well, and I just remember it was just such a hackneyed comedy routine, but it was just something I remember. And I remember another guy that we hung around with and partied with was a guy named Chuck Spector, who someday I would love to get. Heed. Yeah, they named Roger as a guy that they called Heed of the So I Married an Axe Murderer fame. Yeah, he had a huge afro. But anyway, Eric, what do you remember about the early days of Potsdam? Because I know you came
Not
in
so
probably,
much.
yeah, you came in with some very good intentions. I remember you and I played some rugby, and it kind of descended out. It got away from all of us pretty quickly. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I think it spiraled out of control rapidly, coming from like really a small town and I would say very sheltered compared to all you boys from the big towns. It was a bit of an eye-opening experience, right? And really into the spoof and the towel and the citrus air freshener days quite quickly, which really became not just a pastime, but I think most of that only semester I was at Potsdam.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny. It was only a semester, but it was impactful enough, man, because a lot of the guys that's come on the show, like Brian Clancy, our wine expert,
Yeah.
and Tom Glasgow and Val,
Yeah.
who coincidentally I went to the Phil West show with. That's kind of why I brought it up. So just saw those guys, and they're super stoked that you're coming on the show. So you came into Potsdam probably with some pretty high ambitions, because I remember you being like a pretty solid academic guy, and you seem like you had your head on your shoulders relative to a lot of the other people that were hanging around who were seasoned, outcasts, misfits, and the like. So you decide in 1995 you're not going to go back to Potsdam. Like, where did life take you at that point?
Yeah. I mean, that's right. You guys are just too much for me. I think as fun as it was, it definitely wasn't the way that I needed to go, or I didn't know if what was going to come after that. So I took a bit of time off, sitting around my mom's house in Mexico, New York, working in some shitty shop in Oswego, swilling beer in the basement, taking dust off whippets as per usual, just not even pretending to. But not pretending to go to university anymore even. And after about 6 months of that or so, I think my mom got a little fed up, and she told me that I needed to do something with my life, which for my mom who's a very mild person, for her to even make any suggestion like that was pretty radical, I think. So as every good patriotic American boy does when they don't know what the fuck to do with their lives, I joined the Air Force in like July, I think, June or July of '96. And that was it for 9 years. I spent some time in sunny South Texas in basic training, then in Northern Texas to do some training around being a mechanic. I was working on F-15Es, on the hydraulic systems, the engines, this sort of stuff. And then moved to the UK for 8 years. We have a number of Air Force bases in the east of England, not so far from Cambridge, an hour and a half outside of London to the northeast. Spent 8 years there playing rugby, working on airplanes, traveling around Europe and the Middle East at the time. That was the big sort of trip out of Potsdam.
Wow, that's pretty interesting, man. And Roger, I know you probably have some thoughts, but that was sort of a relatively stable time as far as military conflicts, wasn't it? Except for like some action in the Baltic region. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, the Balkans, right? This is like, I mean, Kosovo, Serbia, Croatia, these places for a number of years on and off. In the early 90s, I mean, bits and pieces of things around. And of course, there's like ongoing military action at the time, defending the northern no-fly zone and southern no-fly zone in Iraq, and with regular sort of engagement with the Iraqi military there, but nothing large scale.
Were you still in the Air Force at the time of 9/11? Did you overlap with that at all?
Yeah, it sure did. It was 96 to 2005,
okay.
And I was in the UK from 97 to 2005 till March, something like this. So I was actually in Norway, in this tiny fishing village where there's a NATO air base halfway up the west coast of Norway called Burland. When all this happened, and we were immediately like pulled back to Lakenheath, and everybody was locked on base. Quite dramatic times. And then almost immediately after that, squadron that I was working on was on the sort of involved in the very early days, day one after the sort of naval barrage, but airplanes flying from the UK to the Middle East and then on to Afghanistan, and eventually spending a lot of time in Turkey, engaging in that initial conflict.
Now, were you? Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah. Did you go with them, or did you stay? Were you held back?
Yeah, I mean, I was in Turkey, Incirlik Air Base, which is right on the Mediterranean. Really, like, pretty okay place to spend a few months, despite the circumstances, right? Both the sort of national tragedy and also the being engaged in the war isn't always that. I don't know, always had an enjoyable process. But yeah, so I was 3 months, I think 3.5 months in Turkey. And then later spent some time in Qatar as we were invading Iraq, late 2003, early 2004, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, heavy things.
I mean, it's. I like that you were conflicted because it's such a beautiful place. At the same time, you're there for such shitty circumstances.
Yeah. Shitty circumstances. Any way you look at it, I think, no matter what your perspective on it is, on military action in general, it's never a good time, I don't think.
It just reminds me of some of the images from the movie The Thin Red Line, where this man's destruction of the most beautiful places on earth, happening right all around him, and he captures both of them equally to demonstrate whatever. So, but continue on with your adventures. You go from the military, and then once your service is up in 2005, you said?
Yeah, 2005. Then I spent quite a few months on trains, cruising around Europe, sort of the mainland out to the Balkans, Croatia and Serbia, but mostly around France and Germany with some friends, and Croatia with some friends there. Lived in Ireland for a bit. I decided that I was going to become a man of the earth, right, after being in the military so long. So I connected with a small farm that's in the northwest part of Ireland, north of, losing names. Anyway, let's call it Northwest Ireland, right on the coast. And I arrive and kind of get picked up by this couple. One is like a German woman in her 50s. Her husband is this Jamaican dude who is like 35 or something like that. It turns out that they were also Jehovah's Witnesses, which I didn't know when I signed up for this. So I moved into like this shed built on the side of their trailer, which is actually like the most beautiful place that I've been in Ireland, right on the coast, with some islands offshore. 5 minutes to walk down to the North Sea. Living in this trailer with them, no running water, and a composting toilet, which we were emptying, and it's part of my work on the farm, putting it into the patches, and then I remember the last day that I was there, and it was the last day for a pretty specific reason. They decided that we were going to start cultivating potatoes in the plot of land where we'd been burying our shit for the last 3 months, without letting it. Give it a year or something like this, and it's sure there's some nutrients in the soil. But I literally buried the last bucket a week before, and then they wanted to start planting potatoes in it. So I left that. I returned eventually to the States, wound up in Colorado for a little while, went to Colorado Mountain, Leadville, way up.
I know where it's at. I lived in the Springs for 4 years. So
nice. Yeah, I went to CMC, Colorado Mountain College, Leadville for a minute while I was trying to figure out where I was going to actually live, where I was going to go to university for, all this stuff. So spent some time in Colorado, and then moved on to Seattle, to North Seattle Community College first, and then the University of Washington.
Eric, can I just ask? I just want, after the military, what was going through your head? Did you not have a plan? Were you kind of just living life as on your own whims? Could you just take us a little bit through what your thought process was? Because it's the path of that not many people, at least that I know, do, traveling through the world and then ending up back in Colorado.
Yeah. Yeah. So my longer term plan, or actually the plan that I had fixed before I even decided to or thought about going to Colorado, was to go to Cape Town and go to university at the University of Cape Town. So I applied, was accepted, had my housing sorted out, but I couldn't get my GI Bill to be applied in Cape Town for some reason. It was a fairly complicated bureaucratic process, and I was banging my head against the wall for a while. So I had a plan set up, right, to go there, and then this all sort of fell apart literally at the last minute, 2 weeks before I was supposed to head to South Africa. So I had a good buddy in Colorado that I was actually played rugby with in the UK for 6 or 7 years, and I was living in Leadville. So I went to visit him and just ended up staying for a while until I got my shit sorted out and came up with a new plan.
And then it looks like at some point you decided to move to Seattle. Was that event driven, or you kind of just was attracted to that city?
Yeah. So as part of this Colorado Mountain College course, it was like this traveling field course. Of course, at the time, I forget how old I was. I would have been 10 years, 8 or 10 years older than the other only five people on the course. But getting close to 30 at this point, to 28, I guess, with a bunch of kids, right?
Right. Yeah.
College sophomores, 20 years old or something like this. And it was me, 3 dudes, and 1 girl. And I ended up hooking up with the girl, and we spent 5 months basically traveling the Southwest as part of this course. It's pretty super strong bonding event, I suppose, being in direct proximity all the time in all of these spectacular places, right? Like camping on the beach in Baja, in the mountains in Arizona, on the Colorado River, wandering around in Moab and Canyonlands, all this stuff.
Wow.
So I went to Seattle because she's from Seattle. The day I got off the fucking train, that girl dumped me. I couldn't believe it.
No kidding, man. Wow.
Both of those stories sound like a lot of my friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of my friends did that whole traveling around, all around the world, and sort of just going the sort of bohemian, the Hemingway bug, just
I mean, exactly this, like Hemingway, Kerouac, this whole lonesome traveler style thing. I mean, this really was this sort of kind of romantic notion that I built up for years of reading all of this stuff actually while I was in the military, of going through the Beat Generation and Hemingway and Gatsby, all these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely had this somehow ingrained in my mind, I think, in driving a little bit of the still kind of wandering process.
That's right. So then you've done your traveling, you've gotten out, you've seen a bit of the world. That is always a helpful thing, I think, for a lot of people, to get out from where they're, stuck in, to go out. At least provides you with a certain perspective most people don't get a chance to get, empathy for others, or the unusual, or the foreign or the exotic, which no longer becomes foreign or exotic once you, sort of assimilate it in some manner. But you go from there to what you currently do now, more or less, right? So what's the inkling? What's the inkling, or the beginning stages, or when does that end and this begin, this new life?
There are a couple of things, right? War in Afghanistan, initial days, you say what you want about it, right? I'm not sure if it was the right thing to do or not. I'm 100% confident, though, that Iraq wasn't, right, from my perspective and being involved in this, right? Okay. And I think that this is something that, as Americans, right, as the wielder of the sword, the global sword, we have a very unique role to play in engaging in these kind of military events, and I think also a responsibility to deal with the aftermath that, let's call it the other half of our country causes, right? So this is very much I think the mental place I was at, or the personal space that I was in, is that, right, irrespective of the rest of it, right, certainly what happened in Iraq was wrong, unconscionable from my perspective. And one of the things, one of my larger term goals is to or approaches, I think, is to try to find some balance, right, between the sort of what happened in Iraq and the things that we caused. Clearly, it's not my fault, right? I don't think that, but I think I was somehow involved in. I was involved in this, and I think it's incumbent on us, right, to take the perspective that we're also involved in attempting to find a solution for the issues that we caused, right? Of course, maybe it would have been things that have happened there might have happened anyway, but nonetheless, I think somehow it's partially, collectively, right, our responsibility to help find a solution to this, and also
not arguing any of
as an you know, I guess by extent or as an extension of that more broadly globally, right, which is where somehow I see myself. Right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not a crusader in this sense. I don't really have any illusion about my role in all of this on either side, but I still think that we have some responsibility to do what we can to try to support our fellow man somehow. So this is the space, I think, the headspace that I was in this time, mid 2000s into late 2000s, I guess. So at that point, then I began to go through my formal education. I think I already had a pretty broad informal education of being out and about, and also consuming a lot of things myself, right? History and literature. So I started studying geography, and not necessarily physical geography, like land masses and things like this, but the cultural interactions of people and how space, right, and how space is controlled.
Modern world history, more or less, right? I mean,
yeah, modern world history, cultural history, looking at how equity is achieved in societies, how inequity is perpetuated, all of these sort of things. So very much taking I guess a much more social perspective to my education. And then from there, when I finished at University of Washington in 2010, my girlfriend at the time, who was just finishing, or no, had just come back from the Peace Corps and working in Niger in West Africa for a couple of years. We moved to Zimbabwe and spent a year there. She was working at a university in Bulawayo, which is like the second largest city in Zimbabwe in the southwest. And I was working with, based on my like technical skills in geography, which are like mapping and analysis of space and things like this. I was working with a local NGO that was responding to the cholera epidemic there. And this was really my first sort of engagement with this kind of humanitarian or development action.
Right. Just a side note, when you were in Africa, did you ever try the Ibogaine route?
No, I've never heard of this.
Oh, okay. Well, every time somebody goes there, I always try to ask that. I'm one of the few people who's actually had that. A friend of mine went and visited a woman working in the Peace Corps in the Congo and actually was able to drum up this Ibogaine root and brought it back in a green bottle, and it's a very, very potent hallucinogenic drug.
Nice.
Took it in Brownstone in Brooklyn, so perfect place to do it.
Traveled a long way.
It traveled a long way, so that's fascinating.
Eric,
George,
do you mind expounding a little bit about? It looks like you were there very briefly, but in Lebanon in 2014.
Yeah. Lebanon is a crazy place, right? First of all, there are these three basically warring factions divided by religions, by Sunni, Shia, and Christian / Druze / other sort of more localized religions, which somehow divided the society for ages, right? Endemic corruption, and on top of like these two things, constant fighting. Constant wars with Israel, the influence of Hezbollah, of Iran in the southern areas of the country, and the infiltration of sort of the Iranian global perspective into part of the government, and all of this stuff. It's also a super small country, right? 4 million people or something like that. Probably less now because there's a lot of people leaving, but right next door to Syria. And when the Arab Spring kicked off in 2011, the floodgates opened from Syria into all of the surrounding countries, which has really destabilized the region. Jordan is like one sort of pillar of functionality somehow in the region, but Lebanon certainly was definitely impacted by this massive influx of Syrian refugees, right? And then the conflict that's set up between people that are living in poverty already, the Lebanese, competition over incredibly scarce resources, like water in the country, no electricity or limited electricity, all of these things. And also competition over just space, right? Like where the fuck are we going to put a million people, like a million Syrians that come into the country, into a place that's pretty incredibly dense, bounded by the sea on one side, really unfriendly neighbors to the south, and then a civil war to the north and east. So an incredibly complex, crazy place. So I was working there for just 3 months, a short period of time. This is when I really moved full time into to being a humanitarian. There was grad school before that in Denver, studying urban planning and working with a web development firm on these sort of data analysis and mapping tools that are focused on development issues. But this is my first time in the middle of a global humanitarian crisis. And I was in the north, in this place called Akkar, in a town called Kobayat, which is 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers from Homs, right? One of the major cities in Syria, but quite close to the front lines of the war, isolated by mountains and things like this. But super, super interesting time, providing all sorts of information support to the broader humanitarian response to the Syrian crisis in Lebanon.
Wait, what is it? I mean, can you speak specifically to what it was you were doing specifically?
Yeah,
because that's, I mean, being a humanitarian services can be many things. What's specific?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the organization that I was working for then and still do provides information that fuels the planning and coordination of the humanitarian response. So we conduct these sort of broad-reaching assessments and surveys, really, of the needs and conditions of the affected population, right? Displaced people, refugees, internally displaced populations, the host communities that these people are sort of living next to, this kind of thing. So my role in this then was basically mapping out where these very small refugee settlements where there are a few homes, right? A few tents, a couple families, and some instances, sometimes a few hundred people, sometimes a few thousand, but of varying sizes scattered across the north of the country, really scattered across all of Lebanon. So we were conducting this sort of large-scale assessment of needs and locations and intentions of the Syrian refugees that were living in northern Lebanon at the time. And all that information fed into planning by the humanitarian coordination structure, right? This is UNHCR.
That's exactly my next question. Where does that go to? I mean, who, and then what do they do with that? Who's the one who okay, this is what they need. This is, who's the one that gives it to them what they need then?
Yeah. So there's this long chain, right, of information gathering, analysis, planning by the people that are actually directly delivering the aid, whether it's food or education or tarps to rebuild the shelters after a big storm or a flood or something like that. Basically, we identify the needs of the affected population, feed that into the coordination structure of the humanitarian response, and then depending on the needs that are identified, there are different sort of sections of humanitarian response sectors, right? Whether it's water or education, food security, shelter, etc. And depending on the types of needs, those actors take pieces of the information, feed it into their overall analysis, and help them mobilize the resources from donor nations, from the US, for example, from the British, from the EU.
That was my next question. Yeah. My next question. Yeah. I could hear it coming back at me. My next question was who? Yeah, I mean, is it an American operation? But you said it's a global operation, but generally an American UK operation kind of combined. Is it the UN? I mean, who is who is the foreign bodies that help?
Yeah, so the UN plays the sort of the role of coordination in all of this. They're the ones that are primarily charged with delivering the aid and planning. The donor nations, so the US, the UK, the EU, and its various branches, and then also the member countries of the EU sometimes provide responses. Globally, the US is quite traditionally the largest humanitarian and development donor in terms of direct fund, like absolute funding. Certainly is not as part of our GDP or our overall budgeting, but certainly the amount of money going into the humanitarian response is largely American, British, and European, depending on what response it is. Like around the Syrian crisis, Turkey is a massive donor, as are some of the Gulf states. But again, primarily these sort of, NATO, let's call it.
Eric, would you be able to expound a little bit about the effort amongst those nations as it relates to the work you're trying to do, the spirit of the work you're trying to do? Because it feels like you're compelled to do something positive, for lack of a better word. And here in the States, at least, all we really hear about is how bad the US is in terms of, going into countries and leveling them and leaving a mess, as in, Afghanistan or maybe Iraq, or, even what can you say? You're kind of seeing the other side of the equation. Is it right for folks like us at home to be cynical and say, the US is just taking a shit and leaving it wherever it wants, like the potato field you're in? Or is there actually can we feel good about folks like you? How should we feel? Because we're not educated and stuff like this doesn't get any airtime over here.
Yeah, I mean, this is super, super complicated, right? There are so many things so many factors at play, related even to just one country, right? The US, for example, right? We have our own sort of political agenda for stabilizing regions, making them friendly, opening them to trade, ensuring we can extract resources.
Is it fair to say that is the agenda? I mean, from my point of view, that is probably the agenda of, sadly, what they want to, what corporations and organized governments want to do: extract resources and not really care how they do it.
I would say, taking like a really cynical perspective, absolutely, yeah. And this is the tension, right? Because then there are absolutely well-intentioned, semi-altruistic people and structures, right? Like USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, BHA, the Bureau for Humanitarian Affairs, which is the primary deliverer of US humanitarian aid, along with the Bureau for Refugee Population and Migration. So BHA and PRM, these two are where a lot of altruism is. But as you kind of get farther and farther up into the hierarchy of these organizations, they're all led by political appointees who have to respond to political pressures. And I mean, you rightly know where the political pressure is coming from, right? Not spending money, making sure there aren't angry Muslims around, shit like this, and also making sure that our corporations have access to the resources in some of these places. I would say that the humanitarian, like the purely humanitarian side of that, the emergency action is very far away from that cynical sort of morass of political and financial capital, right? But as you get closer to development, so longer term planning and programming, the development of systems inside of countries, this is much, in my mind, much more closely connected to the political and the financial gain that we can get from these places.
Yeah, we're great at putting out fires. We're also great at starting them. So I mean, so one side is starting the fires and the other side is putting them out. What you don't have is anybody thinking about the long term, right? And that's what you're saying. I mean, it's the reason why that we have, the largest sea mass of plastic floating off the shore of, in the Pacific. It's why you have the wildfires that ring around the entire country of Australia. These kind of things are that they occur due to our lack of seeing a future. So it's like you guys are tasked with the efforts of just being there. You're the best well-intentioned plans for an organization like yours is to fix an immediate problem, right? You're always a band-aid. It's always a band-aid, always a band-aid.
Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
don't have enough structure to see what we need to do about the future. And everybody needs it now. So we want to take it now. We live in a mentality, since World War II of now, 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 now. And it's that has started to create something that you could physically see the future coming right at us. You could
Yeah.
see what's coming. And yet we still, despite all of the bells, the whistles, the sirens, the alarms, we still don't have enough in trying to put it out. It's like we put Biden in office to take over, and that's all we thought about to get rid of Donald Trump. But there's bigger ramifications than just that. About the future of this country, of the world, because I said this country, I am guilty of it too, of that being, the United States is the center of the entire fucking world. I get that, but we do play God a lot in the rest of the
Yeah.
world. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's you can't deny that. Yeah, I guess that's just my rant. I don't really have a question there. I was just sort of more or less kind of putting into perspective what you were saying. I think that's correct, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Even within like this sort of I would say the bigger perspective of international development, there are, again, well-intentioned, well-meaning people that are trying to plan, right? And the intent of it, actually, of USAID is not only the humanitarian band-aid, but also this longer-term effective. Around all of these structures, I would say there are, individuals that are well-intentioned, that are trying to actually do what you're talking about, to respond to these longer-term intractable problems, right? Things that don't seem to have a solution, but we better fucking find one. It's going to be a problem. Because it already is a problem. But the political winds that blow around all of this, I think, irrespective of party, right? Absolutely, voted for Biden for sure. Am I under the illusion that that Democrats are going to fix things?
Correct.
Probably not. Might not make things worse, maybe, right? But again, I think the structures that we work in and the bigger political game that's there everywhere makes it so that these things are indeed band-aids, that the long-term planning goes to naught because there's a change of plan with a change of administration, etc.
Yeah, I do notice baby steps in the world. I mean, McDonald's is going all in on plant-based food. There are baby steps. The auto industry is finally figuring out, taking away fossil fuels to, the unfortunate thing is those batteries are equally as it's as disastrous as the damn gasoline and oil extractions from the earth. But yeah, at least there are some thought going into some of the future. So I can't say that it's not. Some of this has become mainstream to a degree. So that's just people just banging us over the head for so long. But I still think, as far as trash goes, the use of plastic and how much plastic we use, little things like that. It's you've seen it. You've been to Asia. Have you been to parts of the world where you just see mounds and mounds and mounds and rivers filled with and that's mostly comes from us. A lot of that just comes and gets dumped over there because we certainly manufacture the shit out of it.
So Eric, you've been all over the world. You've interacted with all different types of cultures. You've come back to the U.S. and Are you hopeful for the future? And I guess, what would you try to impose on us as just a very small signal, hopefully a bigger signal at some point? What message would you like for us to put forth, sitting here in the developed world where people are only worried about, am I going to be able to buy some more widgets for my kid for Christmas? Or, am I going to be able to have brunch? We say first world problems. Today I'm driving through Greenwich, Connecticut, and Rye, New York, like, in terms of on the globe, some of the wealthiest places. And there's really not a lot of worry, but they'll have you believe that they're worried and trying to solve the world's problems. But I find that hard to believe. Based on your travels and your experiences, what's your sentiment for the future? I know it's an abstract question, but what can you leave us with, I guess?
I'd like to think that I have kind of peaks and valleys of optimism and extreme cynicism. I think, like everybody, right? I think at the net, I'd like to think that there is a continuation of a decent life for most people, right? Or access, actually, let's call it access to decent life, decent standard of living for most people. But that only happens when we actually think about what we do, and we think about the echoes, I guess the echoes or the ripples that our actions have across the globe. Roger mentioned it, right? Like dumping electronic or something along this line, right? The dumping of electronic waste in Ghana, I believe, right? Massive sort of electronic waste recycling, but mostly just dumping. The pushing of plastic in consumer goods in many places that don't have the capacity to deal with these things, right? The reusing is quite common, right? And repurposing things is quite common everywhere. I think people have a good sense of the value of something, but ultimately we send, based on people's demand, honestly, so much trash around the world. So many things that will become trash around the world that we also really need to think about what impact this is having. And I think we need to think, and also I'm guilty, right? Absolutely guilty of consumption of too many things, I think. But this is really one thing that we need to think about. We need to think of in a less linear, more circular fashion, right? I guess you guys are on board with the whole idea of the circular economy, but it's useful in the United States, right? It's great that IKEA is starting to take things back, but this needs to happen everywhere, and it needs to happen at all levels for us to have any semblance of a future that we can live in, right? That's not absolutely ravaged by wildfires, by rising tides, right? By, honestly, plagues of locusts. I don't think they have so much to do with global warming, but I've seen those and they're crazy. All of these things. So maybe to sum it up and make it a little more concise is,
it doesn't sound hopeful.
I think I am hopeful that we actually are beginning to move in the right direction, but we have to be able to see these things, right? We can see fires burning in California and Colorado, but until your fucking house burns down, you're not really going to be so worried about climate change or about wildfires. What I would encourage people to do is, now that most of us are vaccinated, right? Most places are accepting Americans for travel. We've maybe got some money saved up because we haven't done anything for the last few years. Go somewhere that isn't the beach, right? That isn't a resort destination. Also, I do this, right? I go to these places, but I mean, go somewhere, right? Go to Nairobi, go to South Africa, go somewhere in Southeast Asia, come to Amman, see what things are like here, see how people are living, and like reflect on that. Think about how this could potentially be your life, whether you wanted to, and how we can kind of collectively try to make these things that we're experiencing together better.
I call that being a traveler, not a tourist.
Yeah.
And that's
absolutely
my favorite way to go about the world. I hate being a tourist. I don't want to go see the fucking Eiffel Tower. I want to go see, you know what I'm saying? I just want to,
Yeah.
yeah, go someplace and see how people live. You know, it's much more interesting. It's why you're there, not just there just to see the 8 wonders of the world. I mean, see that
Yeah.
too, I guess, but try to incorporate both into your travels. Right? I agree with that 100%.
Eric, have you ever thought? I'm sure it must have dawned on you a couple of times. At the top of the show, we're talking about some kind of foolish young adult stuff like $5 Buzz, the namesake of the
For
show,
sure, yeah.
and
For sure.
whatever it might have been. And now you encounter a young 18-year-old person in Amman, Jordan. You ever have the thought that, why did you end up in, Potsdam at age 18? This person is on the streets of Amman. Maybe you can even tell us what you're doing there, but have you ever thought, what are the circumstances and the mysteries of, circumstance,
Yeah.
that you must have thought that, right?
Yeah, the sort of insane trajectory of bouncing around so many different experiences, right? First of all, I'd like to thank Dust Off for making me the man that I am today.
So great. And you know what? In a strange way, it may have been responsible for all of this, right? If you stayed away from the Dust Off, maybe you figured out a way to stay in the SUNY system and go make widgets down in
exactly
Rochester or something.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly it. And I haven't been able to. Of course, these are sort of things that I reflect on and am grateful every day that I don't. No offense to Rochester, right, or to Cortland or something like this, but I'm grateful every day that I am not working in a factory, commuting back in these places. Would love to see my mom, would love to see my family, love upstate New York in the fall. But I'm incredibly grateful that I've been able to have these experiences, and I think learn from them and try to reflect on and try to improve myself, right? And do something positive out of however negative the experiences, some of the experiences that I've had were. I mean, Potsdam, net positive. I mean, I met a lot of you. I really got to know Chuck and a couple of other people there. Really learned about the Grateful Dead from Tom and Phil.
Yes.
And things like a lot of things that are still with me today, right? My love for rugby, which I played for 7 years, I guess, in the
That's
UK.
great. That's great.
Yeah. So I'm really happy that all of these things actually have happened, that I've had all of these experiences, because I think without the military, I would not be here. There's no doubt, absolutely no doubt about this. Without this sort of my reflection on my role specifically, but more broadly, our role, and more philosophically, I suppose, the human condition and the brotherhood of man and all of these things, that I absolutely would not be here. And I never would have been in that position, I don't think, if I wasn't somehow on the tip of the spear for a little while.
Right. One other thing I wanted to bring up, because I know we don't have too much time left, but I know that you are an accomplished mountaineer, if that is the correct term for someone that doesn't really have that much of an extended background in that. But I've seen a lot of cool pictures of you climbing in the US and abroad. Can you tell us, us novices at home, is there a trip that stands out, and is there another trip somewhere that you're planning on going? Because I think I think your normal home is Switzerland. So there's a lot of opportunity to be up in the mountains in that part of the world, right?
Yes, there is. Yeah, I would not call it accomplished. I would say I'm a strong amateur.
Okay.
I think in the broader, doing things that people have been doing, or the same things that people have been doing. But nonetheless, I've been lucky enough, right, to when I landed in Seattle, actually as part of this thing with Colorado Mountain College, I started rock climbing there, and living in the mountains of Colorado is something that somehow in my late 20s, right, I really grew to love. Working at a climbing gym in Seattle, doing a ton of rock climbing around the Cascades, an absolutely beautiful part of the country. If you've never been to North Cascades National Park, and the areas sort of along the Cascade Range in the Northwest are spectacular. And got to live in LA for Irvine for a minute, and climb in the Sierra Nevadas above Bishop, right? So like Mount Whitney and all of these beautiful places. And then of course Mont Blanc and a lot of the peaks in Switzerland and France and in southern Italy. I think something that really stands out to me is that I stare at Mont Blanc from my office, right? You can see it from Geneva, and so it's in France, but Geneva is basically in France anyway. But you can see Mont Blanc from my office, and I've been staring at it for the last 7 years when I've been coming through Switzerland, in and out of our headquarters between all of the various countries that I've been living in, South Sudan, Nigeria, and all these places, and just kind of like drooling over it. It's quite, if you're comfortable in the mountains, which I am, and you're relatively fit, it's easy. Right? It's big, it's well over 15,000 feet, much taller than anything in the continental United States. It's big, but not technically challenging. So I've had this plan for a few years to be able to climb it in a single push, overnight, car to summits and back, and that's it. So I tried this last year, and it was just way too cold. I was wearing like basically running clothes with then a couple of warm things on top, and then sort of licked my wounds for a while, and then went back this summer after actually beginning to train to run like mountain races and ultra marathons. So at really probably almost the peak of my fitness somehow, at like almost 45 or however old I am, almost am. And was able to climb it from the car, hiking up over 3,000 meters and back in like 9 hours. So this is like something that's technically not challenging, but I'm quite happy about like my sort of comfort to do this like overnight on a huge mountain, fucking absolutely spectacular place. So I think this is something that really stands out for me. In terms of like next climbing trips, it's hard to say. My buddy actually, who's a Googler from San Francisco, living in Zurich, now working at YouTube there. He was my sort of like my sole climbing partner in Switzerland, and they just had a baby, so now he's kind of out of the game for a little while. And so right now, like the big thing is running. This is what I've been focused on, of running longer races, 50, 60, 100K. This kind of thing that I'm hoping to be kind of get to the level of comfort that I have with climbing mountains, I guess, and mountaineering in the next year or two, so that I can kind of continue to combine the two.
That's great. Roger, I know we're coming up on the hour. Anything else you think the listeners might want to gain from Eric's generous time?
Yeah, you ever what do you so you're out there in Amman, Jordan right now. Why don't you give us a taste of what it's like out there right now? What's cool. I know you can't smoke marijuana like we can here in Los Angeles.
Not so much now.
Not so much, no. I know it's,
you can drink beer,
but you can't
drink. It's not so. I don't. It's blurring the beer. That's weird. Anyway, they have some pretty decent beer here. Excellent food. I guess it's like Lebanese or similar to Lebanese or any Middle Eastern food. Falafel for miles, and all sorts of hummus and really spectacular lamb dishes, this kind of thing. But right now it's like, I think it's about 85 during the day. It's dry heat, so not so bad. And beautiful, starting to get incredibly beautifully cool at night. And here in Amman, which is a city built on like all of these hills all over the place, and these deep ravines between them that are all built up. Everywhere in the residential areas, like in the neighborhoods, they grow jasmine, which is blooming right now, and the entire night smells like jasmine.
Really fragrant, yes.
It's super nice.
Heavy
so fragrant. It's like a combination of jasmine, of car horns, everywhere. I don't know
I
if
heard
you
it
can
in the beginning of our episode.
Yep.
There was
Yeah.
somebody laying on a horn.
Yeah, car horns everywhere. A bunch of people chain smoking or in cafes smoking nargila and drinking coffee at 2 a.m. It's a pretty cool vibe for a while. I'd say Amman is. It's also like hot as hell and dry, and it's outside of the residential neighborhoods. It's not so green except for like when it rains once, and when it rains in April, it gets green for a little while. Then it's just brown desert. But Amman itself is quite vibrant and super interesting and really easy to deal with. It's a great, I would say it's like a great introduction to the Middle East for people. If they haven't been, I would absolutely recommend it. And then of course in the south you have Petra, right, which is like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, right? This is Petra, and Wadi Rum, this really beautiful like Martian landscape. I think actually where they filmed The Martian, of red sand and these huge stone domes, huge sandstone domes, kind of like Moab or something like this, but on a different scale. Super cool.
And how much longer are you there for?
I'm just here until Friday, so another week. I'm on right now. I'm in work permit exile from Switzerland. My work permit was denied because my organization didn't repost my job position when they went to renew my work permit. Now I'm going through the whole really fun process of applying for my own job and hoping that a Swiss person doesn't want it, because then I might not have it anymore. So I'm waiting for this whole bureaucratic process to go through, but then heading back to Switzerland for my dog and my missus.
Great, man.
Oh, finally one of those relationships worked out for you.
Yeah. This one, inshallah. Let's hope so.
And what type of work is she in? Is it similar to what you're doing?
Yeah. So Elisabetta works for the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is this massive, the oldest operating humanitarian organization.
All the way from World War One.
World War One, and maybe even I think that this is it. Right? It's been around for a long time, and she's an architect by training and a construction project manager. His father's like a real estate developer in Italy, and she manages construction projects. Her last gig was working on Rafik Hariri University Hospital, the largest hospital in Beirut in Lebanon. And has worked in North Korea and Myanmar and Somalia, and we met in South Sudan 6 years ago now. Right on six years ago or so.
Sounds like an interesting guest, Roger. Do you think she'd be up for it, Eric?
I think she would.
That'd be awesome, man. Well, Hey, man, I just want to say it's really great connecting with you, man, and I think about that time of our life very fondly, and it's great to, share that. And I know that the people I know are going to be super excited about it. And I really appreciate what you're doing, man. And hopefully we can talk again. And if you ever find yourself back on the East Coast or the West Coast with Roger and Pete, we'd love to catch up and have a beer and a couple of laughs and, continue the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, George. It's been great, and thanks for reaching out. I was following some of the episodes of the podcast. Never expected to be on it, but here we are. And I'm excited actually, and grateful to get the chance to reflect a bit, because it's not something that I'm always so good at, and don't always get the chance to really vocalize it or articulate it. And I'm home Christmas, so awesome. Maybe we're flying to New York City. So let's see if we can.
Man, I'm in the Adirondacks a fair amount, so there should be a middle ground, man, that we could connect. Yeah. So looking forward to that. Roger, you want to take us out here, sir?
Well, I want to thank Eric for being on our show. Thank you very much, sir. And I want to thank all of our listeners for listening to another episode of $5 Buzz. Please remember to hit like or subscribe on our YouTube channel or on iTunes and Spotify. If you have any comments or questions or any ideas for future episodes or guests, please email us at $5 Buzz. That's FIVEDOLLAR BUZZ@gmail.com. And we will get back to you as soon as we can as we continue to roll that rock up and down the hill, just like Sisyphus, as we try to save the world. Thank you.
And don't forget the citrus. Thank you.